I see the number jumping up.
Yep.
Hello, everyone who's joining. We'll give just another minute or two to let members continue to log in. We'll wait just one more minute. Thank you for everyone who's joined tonight. Okay, Amanda, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second meeting of our three-part D&I summer series. My name is Amanda Salinas, and I have the privilege of being a part of this year's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We're thrilled to have you joining us for tonight's interactive workshop featuring Leslie McMurray and Raphael McDonald from the Resource Center, whom I'll be introducing in just a moment. But first, we're going to go over a few housekeeping items. Okay, to obtain meeting credit, you must have been pre-registered at jld.net. You must join the meeting within 15 minutes of the start time, and you have to stay on until the end of the meeting. Tonight's meeting is projected to be from 6 to 7:30, and at the end of the meeting, we'll have a survey with a link or a QR code, so just be sure that you fill that out. And at the end of the meeting, we'll add the link in the chat, so be on the lookout for that. A few meeting tips. Please stay on mute the entire time. However, we do want this to be interactive, so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box at any time during the presentation. Leslie and Raphael encourage and welcome all questions. If you don't feel comfortable including your question in the chat for everyone to see, you can direct them to JLD Education Committee, and then someone on the D&I committee will ask that question on your behalf. If you have any technical issues, please email diversity@jld.net, and we'll have somebody managing that email all night or throughout the presentation, so they can answer all your questions if you have any issues. And if Zoom fails, refer to your confirmation email and then rejoin by phone. So tonight we have a few objectives. We're going to focus on 3 of them. First is self-awareness, to identify our own knowledge gaps as they relate to the LGBTQ communities. Second is cultural competency, to increase our own understanding and strengthen our foundation of the LGBTQ issues and how those impact our communities. And the third is inspired actions, to familiarize ourselves with examples how we can be LGBTQ allies and champions. And now, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our facilitators, Leslie McMurray and Raphael McDonald.
Thank you very much, Amanda. My name is Leslie McMurray. I am a transgender woman. I have 2 daughters who live in Atlanta and 5 grandchildren. And it's been really interesting that, I think our relationship has gotten better since I came out, because now I am pretty much living my most, I don't know, I'm just living my own truth. And I have nothing to hide in front of my own kids. And it's not fun raising kids with, a part of you that's kind of shielded away from that. Tonight's training is called Ally Training. And I love the fact that you put that in action items, because ally is not a noun, it's a verb. It's something you do. It's not something you say that you are. And so being an ally has to do with the behavior that you have in supporting a particular group. And we certainly appreciate you having us on board and giving us the chance to talk with you. I've been at Resource Center for about 6 years now, in the advocacy department full-time for a little over a year. And it's been the most gratifying job that I've ever done. I had a lot of fun in radio for 3 decades, but this has really been the opportunity to really, truly make a difference. My coworker and boss, Raphael McDonald, is on the line, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Leslie. I am the Communications and Advocacy Manager at Resource Center. I've been at the center for 13 years. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a Metroplex native, grew up in Fort Worth, went to school here, went to undergrad here, at a graduate school at UNT in Denton.
And then we had revenue. I picked up checks.
Getting some crosstalk here, just here in the background. So
the revenue for
I'll pause a second till that stops.
Any questions?
Akila, could you put yourself on mute? Thank you.
All right. Okay. I think we're back now. So I've been at the Resource Center for 13 years, and earlier today we had another meeting, and I think it's always good to look back at some of the stuff that we've done. When a lot of organizations were focused on marriage equality over the last decade, we concentrated in a really a laser-like fashion on employment, and we've been responsible for the non-discrimination employment policies at literally dozens of places across North Texas, reworking the city of Dallas's, adding policy.
Hey, Raphael,
You're muted.
I got muted there, so just don't know what happened there. Anyway, so we've done a lot of work, and there's a lot more work to be done. And one of the things I enjoy doing is presentations like this. So we'll move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about where.
Well, I think now we're gonna have Leslie share her screen.
You can go ahead from there.
Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about Resource Center. Resource Center was founded in May of 1983. We were founded it was actually the first week of June, not May, the first week of June, 1983. And we originally founded as an organization called the Foundation for Human Understanding, which sounds kind of a warm, fuzzy, but you really can't tell what the heck it is. And that was because back in the 1980s, mentioning gay or lesbian in your title might cause quite a bit of problems and so forth. A year or so later, the HIV pandemic roared into North Texas, and we responded as a community organization. Our first program that we set up is a food pantry, which to this day we still serve. We have grown and added so many programs over the years, programs for youth, programs for seniors. We've continued our service towards people who are living and affected by HIV and AIDS, from food pantries and case management to a really robust testing program all over Dallas County. I'm really happy to be a part of this organization. Like Leslie, I also worked in broadcasting a number of years ago, and I think it's telling that I haven't done anything longer than work at resource center except go to school. So that's, I think, a pretty telling thing. So on the next slide, we have our learning objectives. And if if we have succeeded at the end of this training, we will have several things that we can look back on. First off is providing some basic terminology associated with the LGBTQ community. We will look at the concept of bringing your whole self to work. What does that mean, and what does that look like? It's not the same for everybody. It's not the same, for every workplace. We'll look at bias in the workplace. Bias in the workplace is a huge problem, and there are many different factors that lead to biases. We'll give you a foundation for cultural competency on a variety of LGBTQ issues. Some of them you've heard in the news recently, if you follow what's going on from various points on the news compass. We'll look at phobias, we'll look at isms, we'll see how those particular things influence cultural competency, and we'll give you all some takeaway, some homework, if you will, as an ally calls to action to become better LGBTQ allies and champions. So let's start at the very beginning. LGBTQ. I'm pretty sure everyone knows what that means, but just in case, let's go ahead and lay it out. LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning. Sometimes the Q means queer, sometimes it means questioning. You'll notice that there are times that it'll read GLBTQ. There are other times that, for example, the B may be in front or the T may be in front. The real secret to this is it doesn't really matter, that the order may be different for different groups. It does matter that all of the groups are represented. So I want to make that a point there. Sexual orientation. This is a pretty simple concept. And if you think about it, really everybody has a sexual orientation. At its simplest term, it means that it's a person's enduring physical, romantic, emotional, and spiritual attraction to another person. And who that other person is what defines who you're attracted to and what your sexual orientation is. Now, someone who identifies as bisexual, they are physically, romantically, and or emotionally attracted to two genders. Now, two important notes here. First off, bisexuals do not need to have had sexual experience with both men and women. In fact, they don't need to have any sexual experience as all to identify as a member of the bisexual community. Now you'll notice here in the upper right corner, you see some flags. I think you'll probably recognize a little bit later the rainbow flag that is associated with the LGBTQ community. This particular flag in this particular case represents the bisexual community. And on our next slide, you'll get to see the flag that represents the asexual community. Now, someone who identifies as asexual does not experience sexual attraction at all. They are someone, I think, who experiences what we refer to as romantic attraction. And, kind of think about that from your own personal life. There's obviously sexual attraction to a person, but you think about the romantic attraction, the hearts, the flowers, the nice vacations, the love songs, all those wonderful things that make a relationship. That's what drives someone who is asexual, that part of being with another person, not sex. So that is itself an umbrella term. Leslie's going to talk a little bit about umbrella terms, another umbrella term in just a moment. We call that a forward tease in the news business. So you'll get that coming up in just a moment. And the umbrella term we hear is ace. And on that asexual spectrum, where you have someone who, let's say, does not experience any sexual attraction at all, versus someone who may experience a moderate amount of sexual attraction, but also experiences, pretty heavy romantic attraction as well. So you have demi-ace, you have gray A or gray ace, all of those being parts of that broad spectrum of asexuality. Now, someone who is identified as pansexual does not limit their attraction to another individual relative to that other individual's sexual orientation or gender identity. There is a bit of a difference there between someone who is pansexual and someone who is bisexual. Someone who is bisexual, they subscribe to what we refer to as the gender binary, another term you'll be hearing a little bit more about in just a moment. Whereas someone who is pansexual does not have that limiter, if you will. And Leslie is going to take it from here and talk about gender identity.
Yeah, I wanted to point out one quick thing on the asexual spectrum is that it is in fact a spectrum. So there are people that experience no sexual attraction, or they might experience a moderate amount. but it would be termed as what's called less than average. I don't like using the term normal because too many times someone who identifies in the asexual spectrum is treated like there's something wrong with them. And they're given hormone treatment or counseling, or they're tried to say, believe that they should not be the way that they are. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with someone who is demisexual or is on that asexual spectrum. It's just another shade of normal. So I would say it's below average, but I don't like using the term normal because we don't even know what normal really is, do we? So let's talk about gender identity. When I say gender identity, I'm not referring necessarily to someone who's transgender, because everyone on this call has a gender identity. In most people, that gender identity matches your biological sex. When it doesn't, you end up with someone like me who is transsexual. A lot of these, like Raphael was talking about with pansexual, the terms pan and trans and cis and a lot of the things we're going to talk about have kind of a Greek Latin root, and trans is that meaning across from or on the other side of. So when you have transgender, you have someone who is pretty much identifying as the opposite gender that I was assigned at birth. And when I say assigned, is I didn't really get a say in the matter. The doctor looked between my legs and not between my ears. I don't understand why I'm transgender, and I don't know that science necessarily does. They know we exist, they know we're for real, but we don't really have a particular cause to it. I didn't have any trauma in my childhood. My mom took a banned drug when she was pregnant with me because I was considered a high-risk pregnancy. My mom was 39 when she had me back in 1958. And so they gave her this drug called DES, which is a real powerful synthetic estrogen to try and prevent miscarriages. So some think that that might have had something to do with it, but that drug was banned around 1970 and not used since. So it's certainly not the only cause. It may be a cause. Whatever it is, I know who I am, and I'm happier now than I've ever been. So again, a person whose identification as male or female differs from the sex assigned at birth is that umbrella term transgender. In most people, gender identity matches biological sex. And again, we're talking a massive majority. Transgender people make up an estimated 0.7 to 1.4% of the population. And that population estimate comes from the Williams Institute out of the UCLA School of Law. It's a think tank down there that kind of keeps tracks of LGBTQ statistics. I can't quote the census because the census doesn't count LGBTQ people. Hopefully it will someday. But it's such a decision that they made to keep us out of the 2020 census. So hopefully next time. Some of the abbreviations you might see are MTF or FTN or MTN, which would be male to non-binary. So we'll talk about those in just a little bit, but those aren't abbreviations that you would use when speaking of someone or even writing about them, but they're mostly used as a shorthand on
Learning
things
all
like
about
message
it.
boards and
Junior League Zoom seminar.
So to clarify being transgender, gender identity is different from sexual orientation. Identification is key for trans people. Surgery is not the determining factor. So if you encounter someone who's transgender, they may or may not have had surgical intervention. They may or may not be on cross-sex hormones. There's been a good amount of discussion, and I think it merits clarifying it here a little bit, and certainly we're in an adult setting, but there is an effort afoot in Austin to try and make affirming care for transgender children considered to be child abuse. And they're throwing around some really caustic descriptions of this, which are wholly inaccurate. If you have a child, say that's 7-year-old, that identifies as transgender, and the clinical definition or diagnosis for a child who's transgender is, are they insistent, consistent, and persistent? I mean, day after day, they are relentless. Mom, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. And so if they are insistent, consistent, persistent, chances are you have a child who's transgender. We're very rare. But the treatment for that would be maybe changing name and pronouns, maybe changing hairstyles or clothes. 100% reversible, right? I mean, in like mere minutes. So if that child continues and persists from 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and they start to hit puberty. Puberty is divided into 5 what are called Tanner stages. And they don't make any intervention in Tanner stage 1, which is just where the brain is saying, hey, get ready, there's going to be some changes coming along. Tanner stage 2 is where there is the first physical indication of puberty. And what they can and sometimes do, if everybody's on board, I'm talking both parents, the physician, the child, and a therapist, everybody's on board, they might introduce something called a puberty blocker. And it essentially just hits pause on puberty, 100% reversible. Remove the puberty blocker, child goes through puberty at whatever stage they were in when you introduce the blockers. So again, it's reversible. So then you go 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 9 years from when that kid came out at age 7, and we've not done anything to their bodies that isn't 100% reversible. So if everybody's still on board, the child, the doctor, the therapist, and both parents, then if the child decides that that's appropriate for them, they can introduce cross-sex hormones. And then you might want to talk about maybe donating sperm or eggs, because it can, long-term use, can result in sterility. But it also results in a beautiful puberty, because for me, I cried through my puberty. I hated what my body was doing. I don't want to be 6 feet tall. I don't want to have big shoulders. I don't want to have a voice that gets me misgendered every time I go through a drive-through or talk to someone on the phone. And it endangers my safety when I'm out in public if they hear this, voice that I used to make a lot of money, by the way, for a lot of years. But now it's something that's kind of a curse. And there's an adage with cross-sex hormones, they can give, but they can't take away. So anything that's already been done by puberty can't be undone. All they can do is change some things that haven't happened already, the secondary sex characteristics. So when they are telling you that there are these medical interventions on transgender juveniles, it's just not the case. They're lying to you, because they don't intervene in really, really young kids. And it's done with both parents on board. It's not done under the table or anything like that. So you need to understand the truth. So outward appearance may or may not be helpful in determining how someone identifies. And we're going to talk about people that are non-binary in just a little bit, or that dress in a particularly androgynous way. If you encounter someone like that, it's perfectly fine to ask. And the best way to do it is to introduce yourself with your pronouns. Hi, my name is Leslie McMurray. My pronouns are she, her, and you are. And then they would usually reply with their pronouns. So you're good to go from there. But if they give you their pronouns, please make sure and use them correctly. A person's gender identity is considered protected medical information. So that's important to note in a work environment, because it could be a HIPAA violation if it became kind of the topic of office gossip. So we want to try and discourage that. Transgender is an adjective, not a noun. I'm not transgendered. I'm not a transgender. I'm a transgender woman. So it's a descriptor for woman. Although I live my life as a woman, not a transgender woman. I'm like any other woman in Capel. Some of the variants you'll see, transmasculine or transfeminine. And that could be confusing for some people. It's like, well, I don't understand transmasculine. If you look at the word trans and then masculine on the end of it, it will generally mean someone who is identified female at birth but identifies more masculine of center than just being, non-binary. Someone who's transfeminine, same thing, masculine of center, feminine of center. Cisgender is that word I was talking about earlier.
Sorry, Leslie, could you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. So if you see the term transmasculine or transfeminine, trans meaning transgender, so they were identified female at birth, but identify more masculine now. And it's not completely like, I was talking with someone who is non-binary today, and they are constantly frustrated by having people use feminine pronouns towards them because they identify with they, them pronouns. And so the answer that sometimes happens with them is, okay, well, I'll just use male pronouns with you. Like, no, that doesn't fit me either. They, them fits me. And so if someone is trans feminine, they are identified male at birth, but identify a little bit more feminine of center than otherwise. Because I think it's important for us to note that gender isn't like an on-off switch. We tend to look at it that way, that if someone is either male or female, boy, girl, because that's really easy for us to wrap our head around. We live in a very binary society. But the fact is, gender is really kind of more like a dimmer switch, and there's different points along the continuum. And I think that I can best explain that because I was born, like I said, in 1958. If you look at the gender roles in 1958, they were pretty rigid. And so male-born children were expected to be competitive and wage earners and be a good father and be good at sports and be the disciplinarian and be unemotional and all these sort of things to be a successful male. The idea of masculinity was pretty rigid. On the other side, women weren't supposed to really work outside the house. Whether they got an education or not didn't really matter, because they're going to stay home and take care of the kids and cook and clean and make sure that dad has the pipe and slippers when he comes through the door, and that she's supposed to wear heels all the time while vacuuming and adhering to these ridiculous beauty standards. No wonder they smoked and drank. So I think what kids now are doing is looking at this gender binary and saying, this extreme masculinity, that's not me. I can't, that doesn't resonate with me. But this extreme femininity doesn't resonate either. I see myself more along here. So it's not that non-binary people are splitting the baby right down the middle. They're saying that somewhere along this continuum is where I feel and express my gender identity and my gender expression. It's somewhere along that line. So hopefully that makes sense. And
It did. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. So cisgender, cis means, and that Latin root is on the same side of. So that's just pretty much, all the world except for the 0.7% that are transgender. So if you identify with the sex assigned at birth, you're cisgender. If you don't, you're transgender. So hopefully that makes sense. I talked about our society being a binary society, recognizing really just two genders. But we also recognize, it seems, a lot of things. A room is either lit or it's dark. It's either day or night. But what about twilight? What about dawn? I mean, the whole world is divided up into spectrum, but we tend to look at things in binary ways. It's just how we are raised, and it's how we tend to think about things until someone reminds you that twilight is neither dark nor light. It's just somewhere along that spectrum, and it can get lighter and it can also get darker, and it does every day. So we have those reminders out there that people don't necessarily fall into one of these two binary categories of male or female, that sometimes people identify as non-binary. Now, it's not important for you to understand necessarily what it means for someone to be non-binary in order to respect them and treat them with dignity, but I can tell you a little bit about what it might be like. Because like if you and I went out to a neighborhood bar with a non-binary friend of ours, if I had to use the restroom, I look at the restrooms and they say men and women. Well, I know where I belong, I'm good. But for our non-binary friends, they don't see men, women. What they see is stands a good chance of being assaulted, or they might very well call the police. And neither one of those is a real friendly place to pop that door open and take your chances. And so if you have a non-binary friend at work, they may just not want to go to happy hour, and it's nothing to do with you, but it has to do with the way society treats transgender or treats non-binary people. We just don't really understand them. But oftentimes they use pronouns like they, them. I talked about a person that I work with that uses they, them. And so we get confused sometimes when, especially older people, they don't look at they, them as a singular pronoun. They look at it as a plural pronoun, but it's only conditionally plural. Because if we were at an event and someone left their jacket behind, I didn't identify the gender, I just said they. I don't mean 5 people left their jacket behind. There's only one jacket. But we'd say, oh, someone left their jacket behind. Do you think they'll come get it? Maybe. Maybe I should take it and give it to them. So when we don't know the gender of the person we're talking about, we automatically substitute they, them as a singular pronoun. If I went to the grocery store and got too much change back, you might say, how much did they give you? And it's not like there was 4 checkers, there was just 1. So it's a singular pronoun that's kind of a placeholder. So if you look at it that way, when someone says my pronouns are they, them, maybe you can use those kind of mnemonics to say, oh, okay, cool, and use they, them pronouns for someone who identifies non-binary. Genderqueer is a catch-all for gender identities that fall outside the binary. Again, this is all under the transgender umbrella. A note about genderqueer and some of these others, I wouldn't, upon meeting someone for the first time, say, oh, you must be genderqueer. I would say let them self-identify first, and if they identify that way, then it's great for you to mirror that. So mirror their pronouns, mirror their self-descriptions. Again, the whole big category is referred to as SGM, which is sex and gender minorities. The whole LGBTQ population is estimated to be around 5%. So there's not a ton of us out there. So when I'm talking about genderqueer, I'm talking about a subset of 0.7% of the population. There's not a big flock of genderqueer people that you're going to encounter, but it's nice to be aware of them. Pangender, again, pan meaning all, is someone that might express all different genders, or who for whom gender is not really an issue. They just express. Someone who's gender fluid is someone who may present a little more masculine one day, a little bit more feminine the next, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that would be gender fluidity. And someone who's agender, they join cisgender with people who are not transgender. Agender is not part of the transgender umbrella. Also, not every non-binary person identifies as transgender. So if they don't identify that way, then that's fine. I wouldn't use that with them. The term gender identity disorder used to be a diagnosis for transgender people. That's outdated as of about 2013 with what's called the DSM-5. They now use the term gender dysphoria. Because they've taken the term disorder out of there. It's no longer considered to be a mental illness to be transgender. Up until 1972, being gay or lesbian was considered a mental illness as well. So trans people tend to be about 2 generations behind. We just lag. The term transgender versus transsexual. Transsexual is an outmoded term that used to indicate someone who had had surgery. So as I mentioned earlier, surgery is not a determining factor. So if someone is transgender, they're transgender. We don't use transsexual. It's just outdated. So to sum up, sexual orientation, that's who you go to bed with, right? Gender identity is who you go to bed as. It's a sense of identity. Gender expression, this is interesting because we had the Bostock ruling, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, a Supreme Court ruling back in June of 2020 that ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects sexual orientation and gender identity as far as discrimination because of sex in the Civil Rights Act, which is great. Gender expression has been protected since about 1988 because of a lawsuit that was in the Supreme Court called Price Waterhouse v. Hopkins. Hopkins was a female employee who just didn't dress in a stereotypically feminine way, at least not enough so for Price Waterhouse, and they ended up letting her go. And she sued him. And the Supreme Court agreed that forcing someone to adhere to a sex stereotype, whether it be male or female, if you force them to adhere to that sex stereotype, that's considered discrimination because of sex, and it's protected now under Title VII. Gender identity is internal. That's who you are as far as your gender identity. Gender expression is how you express that gender to the outside world. So hopefully that makes sense. The term transition is simply the process of transitioning the body to match one's internal gender and stopping the dysphoria. When I say simply, there's nothing simple about it. It took me 2 years, for instance, just to get the facial hair to quit growing in my face. 2 years. And that 2 years consisted of getting electrolysis. If you've ever had electrolysis, it is one of the most painful things. Oh my God. It's like they should use that at Guantanamo because you get confessions like crazy. It hurts so much. And I was in the chair for like 7 to 8 hours at a time for that with 2 technicians working on my face. There's a nerve in like the middle of your upper lip. Oh my God. It's like you don't know whether to scream or sneeze, and it's insanely expensive. It costs about as much as a Yugo or as a Hyundai, I mean, and it's not covered by insurance typically. And that was just one aspect of what I went through to bring myself into congruence. So there's no one right way. It's very personal, and it's really awkward because there's also the socialization issues. It's interesting. And usually that's going on while you're experiencing a second puberty. So that's exciting. It's always good if you are an employer to have transition policies for employees or students that might include a personal transition plan, correct names and pronouns on forms and documents, restroom and locker room accessibility, dress codes, the whole 9 yards. Because if you have a policy in place prior to someone transitioning, it really tends to cut down on the disruption that occurs. Gender nonconforming is gender variance or gender nonconformity or being gender diverse. We also refer to kids sometimes as being gender creative. behavior or gender expression that doesn't match typical masculine or feminine gender norms. And we also tell parents that if your kid's gender creative or they want to experiment with things, don't panic, because like I said, the odds of your child being transgender are very, very small indeed. Raphael, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Okay, well, that
There you go.
explains that, why I was where I was. Pronouns. What are pronouns? We think of pronouns traditionally as he, him, his, as I mentioned at the beginning, or she, her, hers. We mentioned also, as Leslie hinted, that some members of the gender nonconforming community use they as a pronoun, and gave a good example of that. Sometimes you will also see what are referred to as neo pronouns. We've got some here at the very bottom, V, Z, Zir, things of that nature. If we first started doing cultural competency trainings, about a decade plus or so ago, didn't really have a whole lot of the neo pronouns, but we are seeing more of them. And this is once again being driven by our youth that are identifying in more gender creative manners, and moving away from that binary that we've talked about. And so some will use they, and an increasing number are using V or Z or Zir or things of that nature. The important things to take away from this are, if someone tells you their pronouns, please use them. If you make a mistake, you can ask respectfully, well, what are your pronouns? And they'll tell you. But you get them wrong, that's like a slap in the face. It's really stinging towards someone. Particularly if you're doing it intentionally. If you do it in a mistaken situation, and this happens to everyone, I've done it. I'm free to admit that has happened. Take the correction, thank you, and do better. That's the best thing. You know better, you do better. And so that would be how you would kind of handle it going forward. Some additional useful terms here: queer or questioning. I mentioned that the Q in LGBTQ stands for queer or questioning. Queer is a bit of a loaded term, and I think that's once again a generational sort of thing. My generation, I'm 55. Queer was a loaded term. It was usually something that the playground bully would tell you as he was beating you up, or you'd hear it as a derogatory term referred to the community as a whole. We are seeing in younger generations queer being used as a term of empowerment and acceptance and identity. And you think about it even in terms of popular culture. You'll remember, it's now on Netflix, but it was originally on Bravo, there was a TV series called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. You go back even further, in the late 1990s, there was a series on Showtime, which was based on a British series called Queer as Folk. Netflix is currently remaking that series and moving it from Pittsburgh, although it was actually Toronto, not Pittsburgh, where it was filmed, in New Orleans. So that's something to look forward to if you're a Netflix junkie like me, thanks to the pandemic. Questioning. This is someone who asks questions about orientation. Maybe not sure. Maybe they've been back in the old days when I had questions about who I was and so forth. I'd go to the public library and I'd go use the card catalog. Remember the card catalog? It wasn't a case of, like you have today, you can just grab your mobile phone and hit Google and find out, anything in your hand. You had to go to the library and look up the books or look up the magazines. And then you'd have to go find some big book on sailing or lighthouses or something like that to put in front of the book that you're actually reading, so nobody would find out that's what you're reading, and you find some quiet spot in the library to go do that. So today you have much more information that's more readily available, so you have folks identifying as questioning. This is we talk about inclusion and so forth, LGBTQ. If you're to go and extend it out, even further, you get this: LGBTQIAAP, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, allies, and pansexual. That's one of the reasons why we sometimes just abbreviate it down to LGBTQ. There has been some controversy in the community where you sometimes have seen LGBTQ and an asterisk. Not everybody likes that, because if you're a member of the intersex community or the asexual community, you really want to be known as an asterisk. So it's one of those things that you have to be kind of careful about using, or LGBTQ plus. Okay, so I'm a plus. What does that mean? So, I mean, you have to be kind of careful about some of these terms and so forth. But we're just sharing this here as an informational kind of a point if you end up saying it. So if you look here at language matters, you can break everything down into kind of, a couple different buckets. Sexual orientation: lesbian, gay, bisexual; heterosexual, asexual, pansexual, and queer and questioning. Under gender identity, we have transgender, cisgender, non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, intersex, and queer questioning. Under expression, we have gender nonconforming, gender non-diverse, or queer questioning, and then you have pronouns. But there are some parts of language that you should avoid.
Yeah. I prefer, instead of being a plus, I like being the yada, yada, yada. So avoid sexual preference. And the reason we don't like sexual preference is because it implies that it's a preference. And again, I would refer to you who are listening. If you think about yourself, do you get up in the morning and decide whether you're going to be straight, or decide whether you're going to be gay, or whatever the case might be? No, you are who you are. And so it's not really a decision. It's not really a preference. It's who you're attracted to. And so that's why we use the term sexual orientation. Also, too, it's not really a lifestyle. It's my life, but a lifestyle would be more like if you were really into golfing and you lived in one of those golf communities and that's pretty much what you did, or if you decided to have a little small farming thing in your backyard where you're growing all the vegetables that you ate and you tend to that every day. That might be.
Or you're a fan of a sports team, but that
Yeah.
would require to have a successful sports team.
Well,
So we're not going to go there, right?
There is that. So yeah, being gay or lesbian or transgender is not a lifestyle. It's a challenge sometimes, but it's not a lifestyle. The term homosexual is not really derogatory. It's just not really something we use anymore. It's sort of fading from the current lexicon. We'll use gay sometimes as a umbrella term for the whole community. We'll also use queer as a word to describe an umbrella term for the whole community, or to say queer art or queer music. There's a queer exhibition. And the term queer, to expand on just a little bit of what Raphael was saying earlier, is queer works in a lot of different things. If someone self-identifies that way, it's okay to say Johnny is queer. If Johnny self-identifies that way, you're good to go. If you talk about a queer art exhibition, I think you're good to go with that. That's pretty well safe. If you mention the queer community has rallied to support da-da-da-da, you're okay. But you're not okay if you say there's two queers in the waiting room, because that just doesn't roll off right. It just doesn't sound. So if it's an individual and if it's an entire group, but if it's two or three, then it tends to take on a little bit more of a derogatory flavor. So I would just say be careful when using that particular term. Dead naming is something that applies to the transgender community. My dead name is, I don't even think Raphael knows my dead name, because it's just not relevant. My legal name is Leslie Michelle McMurray, but my dead name is the one that was initially given to me by my parents when I was born. And it's a name that I use for a good chunk of my life. If you find it out, you can Google me, because I spent so much time on the radio, all of that shows up. But I just don't use it. It's typically used to harm a transgender person. It's like if a trans person has taken the legal name of Sarah, for instance, but their dead name is Kevin, and someone is having a Twitter argument with them, they might say, oh, okay, Kevin, which is really kind of a derogatory way to kind of end the discussion or to really hurt a transgender person. So it's not funny and it's not friendly. It's very not cool. The term transvestite or tranny. Tranny is especially a violent term. It often precedes violence, so we really don't like it. I don't care how many times RuPaul says it's okay, it's not okay. The term tranny was used on a trans woman in Dallas about a year ago. She was walking on the street and a guy in a red pickup truck pulled up, called her that name, and shot her 6 times. So that's the kind of stuff that happens after that word is said. So I really don't like it at all. Hermaphrodite, the term that we use is intersex, and it's someone that has kind of ambiguous genitalia, little from column A, little from column B. They used to do early surgery on these kids, but they would be guessing at the gender identity. So they are waiting now typically until the child identifies as a particular gender, and then they may do surgery if the parents and child so want them to. But people that are intersex are not all that uncommon. They're about as common as people with red hair. It's just that people with red hair tend to, be out in the world, and people with intersex conditions tend to wear clothes. So if you're able, call out inappropriate language. That's super important. That's part of being an ally. I don't want anybody getting in a fist fight for me, but I took a bystander intervention course not that long ago, and they talked about the 5 Ds, and any one of those 5 Ds are things that each of you can do, and that is to like delay or to delegate, where if like you see somebody that's being abused, you don't need to necessarily get in direct contact and get in their face, although you can if you feel okay with that. But you can also document by having a cell phone and taking that video. But it's, remember, if you do document something like that, that video doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the victim. And so you'd want to talk to that person afterwards and say, look, I was able to get video of the person that's doing this to you. And if you want it and you want to see that person prosecuted, I can get it to you, but it's not something for you to run home and put up on Instagram, because that's just not cool. So please do call out inappropriate language. And I'm not talking just with the LGBTQ community. I'm talking about racial things or religious things or any kind of insulting, abusive language. It stops when we say it stops. So we encourage you, know the terms, use them, and encourage others on proper usage as well.
So now we move on to being LGBTQ in the workplace. Several tips to know here. First off, coming out is a lifelong process that people do in their own way. Somebody's coming out story is individual to them. It is not necessarily the same coming out story to everyone. In my coming out story, I came out to my mom the day that my grandmother died on the way back from the funeral home. I don't recommend that. There are better times and better ways to do that, but sometimes the moment just takes you. And you are seeing that coming out is occurring much younger. When I came out was 1996, and I came out at the age of 25, which is about average at that time. Today, kids are coming out in their pre-teens, 10, 12 years old, 9 years old, and so forth. Why? Well, I mentioned the phone earlier. The fact that you have access to so much information out there. The fact that you have, positive role models in the media. I mean, how many trans kids, learned about Jazz Jennings from watching her on TV or seeing her on the cover of National Geographic or Newsweek or the special that Katie Couric did for I forget what she did it for off the top of my head. She did the TV special that she did. So, those are the kind of positive images that a generation ago didn't exist. I mean, when I came out, who were the folks that I saw? Liberace, Charles Nelson Riley, Paul Lynde. I mean, they were funny, but they weren't exactly. It's kind of hard to wrap yourself around that. And and now today we have folks like Carl Nassib, the first openly gay football player in the NFL. So that the future generations are going to have it easier, I think. Living openly is the last stage in the process, and it can be uneven. If you come out, usually you come out, when the coming out stages start off when you're young, let's say 2-3 years old, maybe when you start moving from the home setting to the daycare setting, and you realize that maybe there's just something a little bit different about yourself. You can't quite put your finger on it, but you're different. I remember that. That's what happened to me. I was 5 years old going to school at the Museum of Science and History in Fort Worth. I knew I was different from all the other boys there, but I had no idea why. Then I realized, oh, I'm gay. I came out to myself. I came out to myself while I was still in high school. Didn't come out to anybody else until after I was finished with graduate school. I was with my first boyfriend 6 years before I came out with my parents. And then being out in the workplace has been tricky. In the early days, working in broadcasting from a radio job because I was gay. I was hired 4 days later by someone who didn't care. So that just shows kind of how things are. and some cultures, you think about what their workplace culture is. Is it easier being out? And I don't want to pick on, I'm not picking on any companies, just in case there are anybody who works for these companies here. Is it easier coming out at a place like Starbucks or Brinker International versus ExxonMobil? I mean, the corporate cultures of ExxonMobil and Starbucks and Chili's are different, right? How much harder is it to come out in a fairly strict conformist corporate culture versus one that is a little bit more freewheeling? So that's kind of an interesting thing. Many LGBTQ people lack employment non-discrimination protections. As Leslie mentioned, the Boston case changed that somewhat, but not everybody has up trying to do at Resource Center is get governments and businesses to change their policies and be more explicit in the wake of the court ruling last year. So what happens is that it's often easier for an LGBTQ employee to stay in the closet, and they end up covering, or they call it pronoun switching sometimes. One of the exercises that we do when we do this in a real space setting is that we'll usually find someone in the back of the room who might not be participating a whole lot, and we will get them to come up at the front of the room and we'll have a conversation with them. But the important thing about the conversation is that they have to not disclose the pronouns of whoever it is they are romantically involved with. And it's always fun to do this like law enforcement setting, because we'll find the one big cop in the back of the room who is just sitting there all sullen and ashen, and we'll bring him up to the front, and he will, the wheels will start spinning, and he'll have to try and dodge around the pronouns, and it's always amusing, and it serves as a nice way of being able to kind of demonstrate what for some LGBTQ folks are having to do on a daily basis, even today in the year 2021. The question for employers is this: can your employees bring their whole self to work? Because if they can't, then obviously they are not being able to devote their entire energy to the job that they're doing. They're having to spend a certain significant amount of time hiding, and that's time that's not helping a customer, not dealing with payroll or inventory or any of the other functions that you have in your typical workplace. So what kind of atmosphere brings your entire self to work? We talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity. Diversity being the fact that you have different populations that are marginalized. Inclusion is the degree to which diverse individuals are able to fully participate. Equity is the promotion of justice, fairness, and impartiality. So those three concepts, diversity, inclusion, and equity, are actually different things. And I think that sometimes folks on the next slide, sometimes they think that diversity is the same thing as inclusion, or that equity is the same thing as diversity. And it's really not. Put Leslie briefly on the spot here. So you have a wonderful explainer about this.
Yeah, there's an adage in the DEI language that says diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And equity has to do with company culture. That's kind of a top-down thing, because that's, are people being treated equally? If someone excels, are they being promoted the same way as someone else? Or if somebody is chronically late for work, are they disciplined while someone else is not disciplined, but they are different? Maybe they are not gay or lesbian, or might be a different race, or might be a different religion. So if people are being singled out, there is not equity. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are all kind of walk hand in hand to create that kind of workplace. Brene Brown also put it really well. She said, if I have to be like you, I fit in, but if I get to be myself, I belong. And so I would think every workplace wants to create that sense of belonging.
If you look here at this graphic, you'll see a company that faces 100% on diversity, but not really on inclusion. They have a problem with what they call tokenism, and that's not a good place to be. On the other side of the coin, you have a company that focuses 100% on inclusion. You end up getting basically a monoculture. And neither of those extremes are where you want. You want to be there in the middle, which is that point of true equity.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about some of the components of cultural agility. The first one, we could probably do a workshop that would last 4 hours on just that one bullet point, and that's awareness of your own cultural views. Because I think it would be safe to say that most people aren't aware of why they believe what they believe. They know they believe what they believe, and there's this huge gulf and division in the country right now. But your own cultural views are shaped by so many things. If you think about when you're born, you know nothing. And so everything that you get at a very early age comes from your parents. And that's why so many people are, magically the same religion as their parents, or might get into a similar line of work or go to the same schools, because kids oftentimes want to model their parents, and their parents are shaping their ideas. But also, if you have a sibling, or if you watch TV or listen to the radio, or you listen to music, and you start going to school, and you've got things teachers put into your head, and there's a whole variety of things along the way. And same thing with your friends in school and their parents and those people that you run into, and clergy if you go to church, and law enforcement if you encounter them. And then, of course, there's this little gizmo which has pretty much everything on it, and that's going to shape your ideas. But what do you believe? What's at your core? If you sit down and get really, really quiet, and you get rid of all the stuff that other people and things have put into your head, what rings true for you? And you strip all that away. Is what do you really truly believe, and what makes up your own cultural views? So recognizing and addressing those biases in yourself, because we all have them, and they're in there since birth. And you'd be shocked if you really sit and think about why we think the way we think. Those biases exist, and there's no shame in that. But I think if you can acknowledge them and understand that they're there and not let them account for your actions, I think you're making a big, giant step. Because like when I was a little kid, we had black and white TV. I grew up in Los Angeles, so we had like 5 channels, yay LA. But I used to watch stuff like The Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers and those guys. You know how you could tell the good guys and the bad guys in the TV Westerns? Because the good guys had the white hats. The bad guys had the black hats. So white is over and over taught as good. Black is taught as bad or criminal. And it's just pounded into your head from a very young age. So you don't really think about why you might think a certain way when you get older. And that continues on to today. And it's used in a very subtle way, but the message is very clear. And we just need to be aware of those things so we can put a stop to them. Because Raphael talked about, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He talked about the Bostock ruling. The Bostock ruling made discrimination in employment against transgender people illegal. That's great. Racial discrimination has been illegal in employment since 1964. Has it stopped? No, it goes on to this day. So laws are good, but hearts and minds have to come with them. And until the hearts and minds go, the laws are there to punish if you can get people punished, but folks can get really creative in ways to exclude other people. And so what we need to do is put an end to it ourselves. It stops with me, it stops with you. And that's part of what I talked about in the very beginning, is being an ally isn't something you say you are. Being an ally is something you do. And putting a stop to racism or homophobia or transphobia is something you can do, because you just don't accept it. I live in Capel, and they did an amazing thing. They're still doing it now. I was in the second cohort of something called Allies in Community. And they took a cohort of about 35 of us, and they broke us down into groups of 7. But we did this cultural awareness and really cultural immersion, I guess would be the best way to call it. Because of you wouldn't think of Capel, you look at it as a pretty homogenous city, but it's not. There's over 100 languages spoken in Capel. So the very first night, sitting at the table with me, I'm a transgender woman. To my right was a woman who was born in Taiwan, whose mom was born on mainland China. So there's a lot to talk about there, because there's this political conflict between Taiwan and mainland China. But she's a fascinating person. She teaches Cantonese at the Capel High School. The woman sitting next to her was from Iran, but she is not Muslim. She's Baha'i. Their family was so persecuted that the father sent the 4 kids to, one went to Norway, one went to Great Britain, one went to Australia, and another came here to Dallas. because of the persecution in Iran of people of the Baha'i faith. So if you say, well, I met someone from Iran, you might immediately think that they are Muslim, but it's not always the case. So we constantly are breaking these stereotypes, sometimes even if they're positive. One woman at the table was this amazing vegetarian cook from India, and she's constantly frustrated. She's very successful, but people assume she's either a doctor or she's in IT, and she's neither. And so it's kind of that assumption. It's, oh, you must be a doctor. No, not a doctor. So even if those stereotypes are positive, they still can be damaging. So you need to have the skill to effectively work with people across different cultures, developing and practicing empathy, and understanding the shared values, beliefs, ideas, and learned patterns of behavior, both explicit and implicit, which people use to interpret the world. And there's, we tend to look at, I was talking about a binary culture. We also tend to look at things through, red, white, and blue lens. But it's just our way. It's not necessarily better or worse than the way things are done in other places around the world. Diversity is really important. I remember I used to work for CBS. Maybe you've heard of them. And we were sitting at this big giant conference table on the 5th floor down there off of North Central. And we had a mandatory meeting in diversity. It was for department heads. And it was being put on by our CEO in New York. And so they had this big screen with the guy in New York, and he was a white guy in a blue suit wearing a red tie. And sitting around this big granite conference table was like 12 guys in blue suits, and all white. And I thought, maybe they should, instead of have a conversation about diversity, they should have one about irony, because there was very little diversity within the company. There's not a whole lot of female program directors. There's not a lot of diversity in their upper management. And so I think that it's something that they were acknowledging and saying, this is something we need to fix. But clearly sitting around that table, you certainly saw the need for it. So different things make up cultures: art, literature, history, language, attitudes, technology. And culture influences how a person behaves and what they believe and what they actually know. Because if you have those 12 people around the table and they all have similar education and similar upbringing and similar beliefs and similar experiences, if you present a problem to that group of people, you're going to get very similar answers. But if you have people that are scattered across different cultures and across the world and different beliefs and different experiences, you're probably going to get a whole lot of different solutions for that, and maybe even a much better solution to what that problem would be if you had this homogeneous group. Keep in mind that people belong to and identify with several cultures and subcultures, and those combinations can impact and conflict with one another. An extreme example, I've never met this person, but you could have someone that's a member of the NRA and perhaps a member of PETA. And this slide here to me is really profound, because these identities, perceptions, and experiences are based on a whole smorgasbord of things. Because you could just take that first topic, racial and ethnic background, and you could divide up 8 or 9 or 10 people or 100 people with different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and then start talking to them about education and start talking about socioeconomic status and where they live in the world. And all those things could be different based on that one little thing at the top there. If you have an uncle that's been in prison, you probably look at the criminal justice system very different than someone who has never had someone arrested in your family. Same thing with physical ability. If you are used to trying to encounter stairs where there ought not be stairs and you're in a wheelchair, you probably look at the world a little bit differently than those that can just hop up the stairs no problem without help. So all those things go in to make up who we are. Raphael, I'll let you take it from here.
I keep muting myself.
You do.
Muting myself. You would think I wouldn't do
I'll
that.
just
Unconscious bias. Unconscious bias are social stereotypes about different groups of people that individuals form outside of their conscious awareness. It's reflexive. And the important thing here is that everybody has them. And we tend to organize things in our world by category. We group people based on their faith. We group people based on their skin color. We group people by, what part of the country they grew up in. We group people on whether they prefer Pepsi versus Coke versus Dr. Pepper. I mean, there's all sorts of groupings out there. And, this served us well, back in old times, but today, not so much, not so much. So when we talk about bias in the workplace, the first one we're going to talk about is affinity bias. And it's, because it all stems back from the fact that we pretty much favor people that we have, connections or similarities to. Maybe it's similar hobbies. You go to the same church. Maybe you're from the same part of the country. Maybe you're from a small town versus, them coming from a small town also. And when this happens in kind of in a practical sense, let's say you have a pool of candidates that are in for a job interview, maybe somebody, with an affinity might get more positive treatment in a situation like that. It's one of those things that, everybody's resume might be similar. Maybe they have the same academic background, the same work background and so forth. But, unconsciously you have an affinity bias towards someone who maybe grew up in Wichita Falls versus somebody who grew up in Yonkers, New York, or something like that. The second slide is the halo effect. This is that case of where we have one great thing that happens to a person and you let that particular thing color your opinion about everything else of that person. Maybe it's somebody who borrow the old line from Married with Children, Al Bundy, with 4 touchdowns in 1 game. That was his great accomplishment that he absolutely, carried with him for the rest of his existence. The father in A Christmas Story winning the leg lamp, that was his great thing, winning the major award there. And so everything else about his life, centered around the fact that he and they influence how other things that we would reflect on a person may happen. Or for that matter, let's say something that happens, kind of the opposite of the halo effect, the horns effect, that you may come up on something that maybe isn't quite so flattering. Maybe they went to the rival college of your college and you don't like them because they went to that school. Or maybe they had some other kind of job previously, or even simple as the fact that they wore a tan suit to the job interview rather than the traditional blue suit. That was one thing that a couple of years ago about former President Obama was people were thinking were so scandalous that he wore a tan suit. So, whatever. So this ends up kind of leading to kind of what they call the snapshot manager. Basically, it's someone who makes decisions based on these little kind of snapshot type things, rather than more grounded and how would I put it, more data driven kind of things. Instead they take away from actually concrete decisions and instead come up with some kind of a fuzzy amorphous sort of thing. So then
I was going to say, I worked for a guy that was kind of like that snapshot manager, is that if he saw you maybe with your feet on your desk, for instance, it may be the only time you ever put your feet on your desk as long as you work there, and you could work there 10 years. But if you were in a staff meeting, he would say, so feet on the desk guy, what do you think? And so forever you would be feet on the desk guy, even though that only happened once, but that's that one little snapshot he would take and just apply it to everything else. So yeah, he was pretty hilarious.
We have then attribution bias. This is how we value other people and their achievements. We kind of paint a rosy picture of ourselves, I think, how we got to, where we did based on, the whole Horatio Alger, hard work and clean living, and you can become a successful individual. Well, the whole idea of that attribution bias, it kind of flips that. Others, succeed through, their luck, or their failures was a result of their personality or their behavior or some other external factor that led them to have or not have certain advantages or disadvantages in life. This is kind of almost you think back to great literature. This is a theme that comes up a lot in great literature. This the fact that Jean Valjean stole that loaf of bread, and he was hunted for the rest of his life, and could never do another good thing because of it. So that's just a good example of that, I think. And they've got confirmation bias. This is the thing that you're looking for that confirms your perceived notions or opinions. When you're recruiting someone, you kind of look for maybe some kind of subconsciously thing that, yeah, you made the right decision to bring this individual in to talk to. And this sometimes, you end up, your judgment gets clouded and it's not quite accurate all the time. And as a result, you may end up missing out on the candidate that might really be the answer to what you're looking for. So this is something to kind of watch for in this thing. And then we go to culture and power. Some cultures deem themselves superior to lovers. I just mentioned there about Coke versus Pepsi versus Dr. Pepper. Cat lovers versus dog lovers. I like cats. I'm violently allergic. I'm EpiPen allergic to cats. So if I have a friend that has a cat, they need to put them away because I don't want to have an attack. iPhone versus Android. I have an older Samsung phone, and I actually stopped in on my way into work this afternoon to go possibly looking at another model, and the man wanted to sell me an iPhone. I was like, no, I'm team Android. So what does that say? How about those who love both? What about folks who like snakes or lizards? I have some friends who are into reptiles. And they're not calling them a reptile, but they're into reptiles. Well, where does that fit into this? Or let's say white middle-class Protestant people of Northern European descent. Well, that tends to make up a certain portion of our population. And as a result, some cultures find themselves in general positions of power. Let's look closer at that last word. What is power? Power, very simply, is the ability to achieve your aims or further the interests that you hold, even when opposed to others, or the ability to oppose your will on others, even if other folks resist in some way. Who are folks that have power in our society? Well, our parents. I mean, if I was a generally good kid, but every so often I did try to, push my parents to the point of, I want to do something. No, that's not going to happen. You're grounded. Your boss, there are certain lines of stuff you can do. You cross over those lines, your boss will call you into the office and say, we need to talk. Not necessarily they're not going to ask about what you did over the weekend. They're going to discuss whatever situation is going on. The government, there are things you have to do. You have to file your taxes every year. That's just one example. You have to, make sure that your yard is mowed and the code compliance doesn't come out. Things like that. Teachers, you go back, think back to your school days or your kids' school days. Maybe they don't like math and they have to get an A in math or a B in math or something like that to make the honor roll. Law enforcement, policemen, judges, and so forth. Politicians, we see this all the time, that the power a politician has, examples what's going on down in Austin right now. They have certain things that they want to achieve, and there are certain politicians who don't agree with that, which is why we're kind of in the stalemate that we are right now.
So power equates to privilege. What exactly is privilege? This is an interesting slide, and I'll go through it with you. It's an unearned right, advantage, or immunity granted to a person or group beyond the advantages of most others. Back in my radio days, pre-transition, I was Caucasian, I was male, or at least perceived to be that way. Heterosexual, I was married. Cisgender, so they thought. No one questioned my mental faculties. I was able-bodied, part of a religious majority, made a really good salary, and I was left-handed since birth. So the only check mark against me was that I wasn't right-handed. Once I transitioned, I stayed Caucasian, but no longer male, heterosexual, cisgender, part of a religious majority, and I worked for a nonprofit. So I gave up an awful lot when I transitioned, and it's one of those things, it's just, I'm not looking for a pity party because I'm happier now than I've ever been, but it was quite a shock to me to find out that when I transitioned, that was hard enough, but finding out that you lost half of your civil rights when you did was quite, I didn't know that suddenly all the things that I just took for granted, because there was no door that was closed to me. You want to talk about privilege? I was the spokesperson for BMW of Dallas. And part of my deal with them, in addition to them paying me to drive their cars, but I got a new BMW on the 1st of every month. I mean, literally the 1st of the month, not a different BMW, one with like 4 miles on it. And I would drive it for a month and then they give me another one. The reason they did that is so I could drive all the different models and go on the air and talk about it. But still, I mean, I wasn't putting mileage on my car. I wasn't, having to pay for all the repairs or anything else. And I got this new BMW that was really fun to drive. And that was just one thing. I never paid to go to a concert or go skiing. And it was just pretty much everything was a freebie and tossed to you. And once I left that environment and transitioned, it was like, holy smoke, this is, survival mode. So the issues of privilege can be many. Those with it are often unaware that they're privileged. It can be damaging when those with privilege deny that it exists. They rarely understand the full impact on those who don't have privilege. And it can change across time, conditions, and situations, because I'm living proof of that. Inequities and discrimination occur when power and privilege are not equally shared by all members of society. And some of that power and privilege boils down to some people that have so much of it that they're building rockets. Private guys are building rockets. So let's talk about phobias and isms. You're gonna need to unmute yourself again.
They're not astronauts. That's the key thing. They're not astronauts. They're just people with a lot of money, a lot of money, but they're never going to be astronauts. So phobias stem from fear, hatred, and aversion. This is different though from isms. Isms is a bias toward or against a group, or your ordinary prejudice against a group. Both phobias and isms are shaped by your cultural identities, the things that we talked about earlier, what part of the country you're from, what religion you may have. Perhaps you grew up in a small town versus a large town, went to a public school versus a private school, all sorts of things like that. That is your cultural identity that may lead someone to have a phobia or an ism. We have here we have a couple of examples just around the LGBTQ community: homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. Other obvious examples: racism, sexism, ageism. So those are just a couple of different things where phobias and isms are completely different. So let's talk about creating a safe space. First off, respect individuality. Everybody is different. Address prejudice when you see it. One of the programs Resource Center has is something called Out for Safe Schools. So it's a partnership with Dallas ISD. And on the back of we give them this little, I would reach down and grab it, but I don't have it immediately handy. I'll show you what the badge looks like. The back of it talks about, state it, claim it, and then work on how you get past it and so forth. And that's addressing the prejudice in this particular case, where let's say a faculty member or a staff member sees a student using a phobia or an ism against another student. Raise awareness about the effects of prejudice. They are very real. And this is, we talk about, in society, this can be everything from economic redlining of one part of town because of the people who live there. This can be the school to prison pipeline as another example about how prejudice, particularly prejudice in the legal system, has led to generations of folks of color seeing unfair levels of law enforcement and punishment against them in the criminal justice system. Avoid stereotypes, even if those stereotypes seem to be positive. We got a couple examples there. They're not really all that positive once you go back and kind of peel back the layers on the onion. So avoid stereotypes like the plague, and help garner increased support for minority populations. Remembering that minority populations are really anybody who is different. We talk about those different subcategories and so forth. Minority populations are in all of them. Become familiar with various cultures and history. One of the things that I, absolutely love in this great melting pot that we have here in North Texas is that we have so many varying cultures and histories that call this area home, that have, various festivals and gatherings and restaurants and civic events and so forth. There's so many different chambers of commerce representing different parts of the community. It really needs to be able to, go out there and take advantage of that.
I want to talk about intersectionality for a moment. There was a trans woman of color who was murdered over the weekend. And And she faced oppression and discrimination from a lot of different directions. Trans women of color share experiences of transphobia and cisnormativity with other trans people, right? But trans women of color, for instance, also share the experience of sexism with other women. Trans women of color share the experience of racism with other people of color. These experiences interact and they cannot be separated. If you add to that an economic disability or a lack of education, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have state or federal housing protections. We only recently picked up employment protections, but transgender people can be discriminated against legally in housing situations. So she was in a homeless encampment because it's possible that she was not able to gain housing on her own or faced any of these other forms of discrimination and intersectional oppression. And so it's something to think about when we encounter someone, is that they don't view the world solely on just one plane, that there's a lot of things that are often stacked against them, and that's intersectionality. Intersectionality maybe is a term you're familiar with, but maybe not from where it came from. It was initially brought up by an attorney in a trial because there was an African-American woman who worked for a company, and she was suing that company saying that they don't promote African-American women. And the judge at the time said, you can't sue on both of those things at once. What you can do is have two separate trials. One is that they don't promote women, and the other is that they don't promote African Americans. Well, the company could show that they did promote women and they promoted African American males. And so they dismissed her case, ignoring the intersectionality of the discrimination that she faced, because they didn't promote African American women, but they promoted women and African American men. So that's where it's important to look at the intersectionality of people, because they're often not facing just one more. Trans women of color also experience discrimination uniquely as trans women of color. And that's a tough place to be. There's 34 that have been murdered so far this year in the United States, 44 last year. So we're certainly on pace for it to be much, much worse. And that's no fooling. So creating safe spaces, again, these are action things that you can do. Encourage honest dialogues about various practices, including benefits and consequences, remembering that your role is to help. And I know everyone here is on board with that. Respect confidentiality, talk and listen without judgment. Don't ever shame people. You're not going to be an expert, and it's not going to happen overnight, but if your heart's in the right place, we'll know it. You can understand the fine line between standing up for a person in a particular group and speaking for that person. Understand and use the power that you have as allies in contacting elected representatives and writing op-ed pieces. If you've never contacted your elected representatives, I would encourage you to do so. It's something that it helps you participate in the system, and they're dying to hear from you. They really are. They love hearing from you. Even if it's someone you disagree with and you're saying, don't you dare vote for this, generally when you call their office, you're not going to speak with the representatives, you'll speak with a staffer who's super friendly. And whether you agree or not, they want to know your opinion. They want to know where you stand, and they want to hear from their constituents. So doing that's really helping them do their job a little bit better. And if they hear from enough of you, they may often change a vote because they want to keep their jobs, right? So understand and use that power. Maybe if it's writing an op-ed piece or an opinion piece for the newspaper, whatever it might be, you can help in a whole lot of different ways and understand the power that you have as an ally, because you're not necessarily part of a particular group, but that group's safety, rights, and dignity matters to you.
Now, we've touched on this already, but I want to go into a little bit more depth at this point. And this is the issue of LGBTQ employment. June of last year, a Supreme Court case, the Bostock case, they decided that the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act covers LGBTQ employees. Now, it is important to note that even though it said that it covers the employees, it did not add or enumerate sexual orientation or gender identity, which is why when you have an individual company, the policies are still important. We recommend a model policy like what you have displayed down here at the bottom, that it includes the specific stating of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression right there in the policy so that it is visible. Companies need to pay attention to both the policies and culture. We see in larger companies, major employers, they have all sorts of different kinds of employee affinity groups, or ERGs, or business resource groups, BRGs. A couple different goals on that. They boost employee engagement. They help develop leadership. They get input into setting company goals, company policies. In some cases, they help to direct the charitable giving that the company has. The bottom line there being that the more a company is inclusive of its workers and who they are and what they bring to the table, in essence, it means more productivity and more return on the dollar, bigger profits, more and better happy shareholders, and things of that nature. Allies need to be visible in companies. Allow visible displays of support. This can be social media, this can be pins, this can be signs, this can be in the email boxes that you send back out to folks, putting the pronouns on there, as well as on internal website. How many companies you think back to June? You go look through your Twitter feed. How many companies changed their logos in June to some variety of the pride flag, or what they call the Pride Progress flag, which is that combination of the traditional rainbow flag with additional stripes for black and brown, representing the other racial members of the LGBTQ community, and this kind of little triangular insert that includes the colors of the transgender flag. How many companies do you think of, just kind of off the top of your head, the big companies that change their logos to some, variant of the rainbow flag or the Pride Progress flag? Just dozens of them. And the second July 1st hit, it was like the day after Christmas, they took them all down, poof, they disappeared. It's fine to be an ally in June, and we love allies in June, but they need to be more consistent throughout the year, which is one of the reasons why we suggest here in this final bullet point that you need to celebrate LGBT History Month on social media. That's coming up in October. So you got a little bit of time to think about that. Think about LGBTQ history. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of history here in North Texas involving the LGBTQ community. The Crossroads down at Cedar Springs and Oak Lawn, there is a plaque that the Texas Historical Commission has there, recognizing that area as a heart of the LGBTQ community, as just an example. If you have any questions, here are our email addresses. We do look at our email and we occasionally respond to them. I'm not necessarily the quickest in the world in terms of responding to that. And if there are questions in the chat, we saw some earlier, but I don't know that we have any right now. We would love to be able to answer them. We still have a few minutes left in this particular presentation time.
Leslie or Raphael, are the slides going to be available somewhere for individuals that want to read more about it after the session?
I think the session was recorded, if I'm not mistaken. So that you can certainly make that available, or I can send you the slide deck if you like, but it just doesn't have the contextualization.
Perfect, thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Because we'd love to answer them.
I do. I was going to type it out, but I'll just throw it out there. You mentioned that your organization, the Resource Center, works with governments and businesses to change their policies. What does that engagement look like? Like, how does a company get in touch with you all? And
you'd be surprised. In one case, it became, because I live in Capel, and so I just looked up online what are the company policy, the city's policy for hiring employees. And I noticed it didn't include sexual orientation or gender identity. So I just called up the mayor and I said, can we have coffee? And she said, sure. So we met at Starbucks and I said, hey, we'd like to have these 7 words, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, inserted into your employment policy. And best of all, it doesn't even have to be voted on by council because it can be done administratively by your city manager. And she said, no kidding. So she put me in touch with the city manager. He passed me to an assistant. We revised the employee handbook, and it got done. It took a few months, but it was, city government takes a little bit of time, but it got done. And it was just through having a cup of coffee with the mayor. Other times it's calling up like the commissioner of the Big 12 and saying, hey, did you know? And sometimes they go, no, I had no idea that that wasn't included. Hey, would you mind doing it? No, not at all. It's the right thing to do. Great, cool. Others, it takes a little bit more of a fight.
Yeah, I work for a company and they're working on a lot of initiatives. We've had a lot of turnover, so there's a lot of things going on. But one thing that they're working on is, equity and diversity, equity and inclusion. And so I was just curious if I could get, put you all in touch with.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Give me the number of your HR person. We'll have coffee and it'll be fixed in no time.
Well, I don't know about no time, but it'll be fixed. It'll be fixed relatively quickly. We're really good, I think, at making the case for inclusion, and we're persistent. We are we believe in what our boss refers to as the long game, and it has been effective. You think about how water erodes a rock. That's us.
Yeah.
We're just going to keep dripping and eroding and working and working and working, and that's just how we do it.
I appreciate all the kind words on the comments. Also, too, if you're able to share the survey with us when you get done, we would love to be able to evaluate our performance as well, because we always want to try and make it better.
There was a question about, do you have any books that you recommend to cisgender people on gender identity?
Wow, there's a whole bunch.
And sexual orientation.
Jenny Boylan wrote one called She's Not There, and that's a great book that talks about transition and dealing with the family. One of my very favorites is a book, I think her name is Shelley Frankel, but it's called It's Always Been This Way. And that is a beautifully written book about children. It's just incredible. So those are two that I would really recommend, but there's an awful lot that are out there. And if you want to send me an email, I'll give you a reading list, but those are two of my favorites. Well, I do love the comments. It's very heartwarming. You give me a lot of hope there, because sometimes you see stuff either in the news or from Austin, from our representative government, and sometimes it can get you feeling a little bit down. But seeing the support here is very, very heartwarming, because it's what I know in my heart to be. People talk about Texas and Texans, and I'm from California, and I found Texans to be the most incredibly warm and welcoming and wonderful people until I see the legislature go on. It's like, who voted for these people? What are you even talking about? If your grid came to near failure, or if your power was out in February, know that fixing that is not on their special agenda, and it wasn't in the regular session, but they're worried about trans girls playing volleyball. So yeah, the wonderful comments are heartwarming.
That might be all the questions that we have. A lot of people, I think, will be reaching out to you, Leslie and Raphael.
I hope so, because that would be my pleasure. You talk about things with kids. I've got 5 grandkids, and I remember my 7-year-old granddaughter when I was getting married to Katie. They'd known Katie and life, but I knew Katie. And when I sent out the wedding invitation to my daughter, who lives in Atlanta, she put it up on a refrigerator. And my 7-year-old granddaughter saw it and noticed the last name McMurray, and she knows that my daughter's maiden name is McMurray. So she pointed at the wedding invitation and she said to my daughter, "Is Grandma Leslie your mom?" And my daughter said, "No, she's my dad, but now she's a girl." And that's a brilliant response, because for one, it's correct. It's also age appropriate. And also she used the correct pronouns all the way through. Hannah, who's 7, her response was, "Oh, okay." So there you go. There was no big argument or discussion or confused. She was able to handle it, and she's totally well adjusted. She's now 10 and heading into elementary school. So as long as you keep things age appropriate, you can pretty much talk to kids about anything.
Why don't you tell them the story about your daughter and the wedding? I love the story. I hate to pull this on you here, but I love this story. It makes me tingle. It's so wonderful.
I do too, but it almost makes me cry every time. So hopefully I'll be able to hold it together. But my oldest daughter, I was able to walk her down the aisle and do all those kind of things as her dad. And my youngest daughter, after I transitioned, she'd been dating a guy named Ryan for like 5 years, and we all knew that they were going to get married, but he just hadn't asked yet. And so I talked to my daughter frequently, and so we were just on the phone one day, and I asked her what she did over the weekend. She said she went to a friend's wedding. And I said, "Did you have fun?" She goes, "Yeah, it was great," until they had the father-daughter dance. And she said, "I just lost it." She was just sobbing there. So here she's at this wedding, and her friend is dancing, and she's just losing it. And I told her, I said, "I am so sorry, because I never meant to take that person from you." I said, when it's your wedding, it's your show. I'll do whatever you need me to do, play whatever role. I'm just glad to be part of it. And she said, "I know." She said, "I'll find something for you to do that's appropriate." And then she paused and she goes, "One thing's for sure though." And I said, "Yeah, what's that?" She goes, "You and your fake boobs aren't walking me down the aisle." Well, I love that we have that kind of relationship, that we can have that kind of talk. But when she got married, I didn't walk her down the aisle. My son-in-law, Chris, did, her sister's husband, and he did a beautiful job. But at the wedding, weddings are so heavily tradition and gendered. Ordinarily, the minister would turn to the father of the bride and say, "Who gives this woman to be married?" And the typical answer is, "Her mother and I do." Well, that wasn't the case there today. And so instead, and the only thing I had to do with this wedding is I paid for it. My daughter planned every single bit of it. And so the person turned to me and said, "Leslie, do you give your blessing to this marriage between Ryan and Chrissy?" And I said, "I absolutely do." So she'd asked me to speak, and I did. I wanted them to understand and know the little girl that I knew, because they all knew Chrissy as an older adult. She was almost 30, but I knew the little girl that I raised. And so I passed it off to Johnny, who was their best man, and he went and did the first toast and all that routine. So later, the first dance, she and Ryan were dancing to Frank Sinatra, "The Way You Look Tonight." And after a couple of minutes, she passed Ryan off to his mom, and I had no idea, but she turned and she put her hand out to me, and I got to dance with my daughter at her wedding. And I just sobbed the whole time. I mean, we're dancing. So here, she wasn't embarrassed of me at all, because here's her dad wearing this floor-length sequin dress and dancing with her at her wedding. But it was the most loved and most accepted and most affirmed that I'd ever felt in my entire life. It was like wonderful. And it wasn't about me, but it was about her desire and her wishes. And I could not ask for two daughters that are more accepting and more loving and more encouraging than they are. It's just, I am so blessed. That's that story. I made it through without just tearing up. Usually I'm a mess. Well,
Sorry to put you on the spot, but that's just such a beautiful story that I think they needed to hear it.
yeah, that's one of my favorites for sure. Well, if there's anything else we could do to help, please, please, please reach out to us. We love hearing from you, and I do answer every single email that I get. And we are so grateful to Junior League for having us on, and for your supportive relations center. It's something that we value greatly.
Thank you. Thank you.
So much. Thank you so much, both Leslie and Raphael, for sharing your personal stories with us tonight, and for the wonderful, in-depth, comprehensive information that you provided for our members. I am going to try to share my screen to have our, I think that's, let's see.
There you are.
All right, so let me get down to, oh, let's see. All right, so I think that we've got the closing comments up there for everybody to see. One quick announcement: we have one meeting left in our D&I summer series, and it will be taking place in September, and the topic will be critical race theory. So please keep your keep your attention out for more information to come. That will be out very soon. And finally, here is the meeting link, the survey link rather, for tonight, and the QR code. We will also send a reminder about the survey out within the next day or two. The survey will be open for 1 week, and if you would like credit for tonight's meeting, we do request that that is filled out in order to receive your credit. And I know, Leslie, you had asked about receiving the data from that, and we'd be happy to share the anonymous data once we've gotten that compiled. That's all for tonight from our end. Thank you to all of the members who were able to join for tonight. And thank you so much once again to Leslie and Raphael and representing the Resource Center for us tonight. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.